Oh, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. Today, I'm here to tell you about some tips of what you can do if you want to join some kind of a design movement and be a game designer in them, in the current tabletop RPG hobby. And the first thing you have to do is figure out what kind of game designer you actually want to be. There's basically three important possibilities if you want to be a designer within a movement. Now, you can always make your own weirdo game, your own thing, put it out there without being part of any kind of a bigger design movement, and try your luck. Now, most of the times, that won't really get you anywhere. Most of the times, your own game is going to kind of just vanish, and I mean, if you're making it just to say you've made a game, go for it, right? If you're making it to be really successful, unless you're someone who's very well known or who's going to be putting a great deal of money into it, and there's the old saying, how to end up with $1 million in the RPG industry is start with 2 million, right? So you could do that, but if the goal is to be part of something where there's going to be a group within which you will be fitting and therefore being able to market yourself or your game, then you want to be part of some kind of a design movement. And this is why that's recommended. Now, if you want to go your own way, you want to try your luck, you have a system that doesn't fit into any of these movements, which are basically all in some way or another D&D based. Well, one of them isn't, but you'll see why that one doesn't work either in a second here. But anyways, if you've got your own particular system that you really want to push forward, then the only thing I'd recommend is that you get yourself somebody to be a really good consultant. And I am available. I do consulting. Oh, there goes my cat. So if you want to hire me as a consultant, I can try to help you make sure that your game will be as good as it can possibly be before you launch it out into the world. And that actually applies regardless of what type of game you're creating, but I think it might be especially important if you're making a game that isn't really based on any previous foundations, or if it's stuff that has a lot of difficult new mechanics or historical context, or you want advice on how to market it or advice on how to present a setting or stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. I've been a pretty successful consultant in a large number of projects, including 5th edition D&D, but not only that. So if not, though, you want to join one of these design movements. There's only really 3 to speak of. Actually, only 2, but the first one I had to bring up because it's just funny, right? So the question is, why do you want to make a game, right? You might want to make a game because you just have your game to make, and then you can go and do your own thing. It doesn't matter if it's just all about you saying you did a game. You don't care if you make money off it. You don't care if you get recognition off it. You just want to have a book that you've published that you said was yours. Then just go independent, right? Completely. Now, let's say the other scenarios. Do you want to do that? So do you want to make a game? You don't really even know what game you want to make, or if you really want to make any game, but you want to be thought of as a game designer and be impressive in that sense. Well, in the old days, you had the Forge, and then after that, you had story games. But both of those have collapsed under the weight of their own idiocy, and they're completely defunct now. So, option 3 at this point. Hey, what? I've got a cat meowing at me. Option 3 at this point is Sword Ream, which is the newest movement for pretentious hipsters that don't actually want to make any games. And that'll be the first one I explain. Now, if all you want is to get maximum coverage, you're only really interested in D&D, and you're willing to make a lot of work for steady but never impressive amounts of money, then you might want to join the DM's Guild and make third-party 5th edition products. Finally, if you're doing it because you really love game design, you enjoy D&D but want to challenge the limits of what it does, and you want to make games that probably won't make a lot of money but maybe can, and that most importantly, will really show off within the context of that community what you're able to make in terms of game product, then your option is obvious, the OSR. So the first of these, Sword Ream, is a movement that came about when a bunch of people in the SJW left decided that the OSR was full of Nazis and white nationalists because it had 2 or 3 people that voted for Trump in it. There are no, to my knowledge, to this day, haven't been able to show a single RPG product or designer that is, avowedly a white nationalist or something like that, right? Or a racist even. So, but they wanted to say that it was, and they wanted to destroy the OSR because they hate Dungeons and Dragons and everything to do with it. So they pretended to be deeply concerned members of the OSR, and then claimed that the OSR had to die for its own good, right? And when that didn't happen, when people didn't shut down the OSR because of how, a small number of people who've never produced anything in their lives complained, they said, well, then in that case, we're going to make our own thing, and it's going to destroy the OSR by the wonderfulness that is our own thing, and we're going to call it Sword Ream. And so there are a bunch of people writing on social media, mainly on Twitter, in a hashtag about this thing called Sword Ream, where you have a sword ream, and it's all about how wonderful it would be to make your game or what your game will be like, but it's never longer than 250 characters, and you don't actually produce any games. They've been around for months now. They haven't produced a damn thing, and that's because it's not about that. It's about, first of all, it's about virtue signaling as a leftist. Second, it's about acting all pretentious and looking down on other gamers. And third, it's about talking in a pretentious way about role-playing games and about how wonderful your role-playing game could be and this idea or that idea, but not putting any discipline into it. So it's basically part of getting to say that you're part of a movement and that you're a game designer, like in the sense that someone living in a in a trailer park is a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, right? Like you're any day now, it's going to happen, right? These are people that have no discernible talent or ability, but want to be thought of as really profound or really intellectual or really, brave activists or whatever, right? So if that's what you are, if you're a pretentious dick and you just want to act like you're a game designer and not make anything at all, Sword Ream is the place for you. And I'm telling you, it's ripe for the plucking because it's got like at least a week and a half before it completely dies. It's down to maybe like 2 tweets a week now from, before its peak when it had 5 or 10 tweets a week. And I'm sure that it's going to be doing really well in the near future. But this is your chance. Get in while you can still get in. Say something about how awful the RPG Pundit is, or how you have a Sword Ream about paladins eating pudding together or something like that, and then there you go. That's it. You're a game designer, right? You've not made anything, sold anything, earned anything, or accomplished anything, but you can call yourself a part of a design movement. So that's option 1. Now let's say you don't want to do that. Option 2, good old D&D 5th edition. The D&D 5th edition has permission, it has a license for making third-party products. And on Drive-Thru-RPG, you can make these through something called the DM's Guild. And there are thousands of these products on the DM's Guild. Obviously, some people are making money off it, and these products are all, the big advantage is that they're all for 5e, right? For 5th edition D&D, which is right now probably the most played game in the world. I mean, it's certainly the one that's most actively played by people who are involved in RPG network externalities, as my friend Ryan Dancy once called it. So that's a big plus. You want to sell your product. If you can put the D&D 5e stamp on it, that's going to help you sell your product, even if your product's kind of mediocre, right? But it could also be good. The only problem is it has to be for 5th edition. Now, I've seen products that are sold for the DM's Guild that are really more like setting stuff, right? Like they have random tables or a world setting, or they have guidelines or things like that, and then they don't really have a lot of rules in them. And so you look at those, and they could be for 5th edition or for 3rd edition, 2nd, 1st, basic edition OSR, basically any of the editions, right? So you could do that. You could do something like that and just sell it as part of the DM's Guild. If you really like 5th edition D&D, then you could obviously make stuff. But you have to be very careful here, because there's a problem that I've covered in a recent video, I think 2 videos ago, where I said the problem with D&D 5th edition is its players. With D&D culture, they don't want something radically different. You look at the most successful products in the DM's Guild, and they are like selections of random tables for making cities, or a collection of stuff about loot for monsters, new monster manuals, stuff that have like little scenarios for adventures, collections of items, but not even like magic items for the most part, and things like that, right? So they want supplementary material that they can use while they're running or in between running the official party products of Wizards of the Coast. Sadly, my biggest regret about 5th edition is that the people that have played it decided they don't want to play around with it, to modify the rules of it in a system that was designed. And I was explicit about this with Mike Merles. We were together, both in agreement that was going to be one of the big features of 5th edition, so that you could mod the hell out of it, right? You can change anything that you want to. You can make it into a completely different game while still just keeping the skeletal core, right? That's the core concept of the OSR, and that was supposed to be the core concept of 5th edition. So in theory, third-party products could have been just as wild and just as like avant-garde and out there in terms of pushing the limits of 5e as the OSR is. But in practice, that's not what 5e players want. They don't want you to make like a, World War II version of D&D 5th edition, right? They don't want you to make some kind of weird setting with like alternate rules in it, right? Like they Lion and Dragon couldn't be for 5th edition because people wouldn't want that. They go, no, well, hang on, that's not right, because Jeremy Crawford said that, the spells work this way, and you've made a completely different spell system. So how, we can't operate with that, right? Like they just can't process it. They have to go by what are the official rules. So basically, the products that are really successful in the DM's Guild tend to be the ones that do not present optional rules. They present additional material that happens around it without changing anything from the real core of, not the core, but the whole rules as written of the official 5th edition rules. So if you don't particularly care about being super creative with rules, maybe you can still do something with the DM's Guild. Now, the plus side is you have a big audience of potential customers if you can get them. The downside is that you get a massive cut taken out of you by TTRPG and Wizards of the Coast, right? So you are working as a kind of semi-wage slave for the two of them. It's not a pretty picture. And you're basically stuck with that if you want to be able to put the 5e imprimatur on your books. So you're going to be doing a lot of work with some very strict creative limits of how much you can do. Less than if you actually worked for Wizards, but definitely a lot more than if you're doing OSR stuff, right? But if your goal is to make product and you can fit yourself within those strictures and you hope to make a little bit of money, you're probably not going to make a lot of money, because it should be noted that there has been no standout 5e product, third-party product, right? It just hasn't happened. Not for like the DM's Guild, right? You could kind of argue that the Adventures in Middle-earth, which is a supplemental product, but that's a very special thing, because that's Tolkien. It's an officially licensed product. It's not part of the DM's Guild as such. But there's been nothing that some little guy has made that has ended up being a blockbuster hit that everybody is talking about in the D&D 5e world. It just hasn't happened. There's been a lot of products that have been moderately successful, probably made some good money for the people that wrote them, but that's it. So those are your two first options. Then your last choice, if you want to be part of a design movement, is the OSR. And the OSR I've already covered in a previous video, but its big advantage, and the thing you have to focus on if you're doing OSR, is design, right? Not just game design, but world design. You can do either one. But it's important that you to be a part of an OSR designer, what you have to do, first of all, is really understand the core basics of what D&D is, right? The fundamental stuff that you can't change. And that's a very simple set of rules, right? It's the old school core of the 6 attributes, the idea of having hit points, armor class, some kind of saving throws, so you can vary a little bit how you do them. There's got to be a class system, a race system, and a level system, though the race system might not require, depending on the setting, might not be required depending on the setting you're running if you're not running a setting with multiple races. Where you can do race as class, right? And then the things like, how you do damage and all that sort of things. So this is the test. Is your product OSR, yes or not, right? It is OSR if someone can do a flail snail with your character. And I'm going to explain what that means. Flail snail is a term that was brought up from Google Plus a few years back, which is basically when people were playing OSR games online, and as a flail snail game was one where you could just bring any character you'd made using any OSR system and join the group, and the character appears as is, and you run it like that, right? So everybody was just bringing their own character, didn't matter which system they were playing. And the reason that works is because OSR systems have to be compatible with each other. So if you can take a character from your game and with like a minute or two of modifications at most, make it work as a character in an OSR game, with characters from other OSR systems or D&D editions, then your game is OSR. If you can't do that, then your game is definitely not OSR. I should note, if you can do that, then your game is probably OSR, because there might be a few other strictures. But the key is that your game has to be compatible with other OSR games. So a game, like my friend Venger, God bless him, he keeps trying to insist that Alpha Blue is a OSR game. It's not. It's clearly not, because it is not compatible. The mechanics that you roll are not the same mechanics that you'd roll in an OSR game, right? The system is totally different, right? There aren't the same rules for how your character can function as in, Swords and Wizardry or Lion and Dragon or, D&D Basic Expert Set or any of those other OSR or D&D editions. Whereas a character from Lion and Dragon, for example, Lion and Dragon is pretty radical in that characters advance a little different. They have a little bit different, level of what you can expect them to have in hit points. The magic system's totally different. But if you transfer a character over, it still works the same way. For example, the magic in Lion and Dragon, even though it's not the memorize and cast magic that you have in most D&D systems, how it would affect a character would affect that character exactly the same way as it would affect a character in Lion and Dragon. So the rules are the same. I don't have to modify the spell so I can explain how it'll work on a character from Swords and Wizardry, right? So this is why it's OSR. So that's the only limit. And then beyond that, you can go hog wild, right? You can take your imagination all over the place. So you can obviously produce setting books like Dark Albion. You can produce systems like Lion and Dragon. You can produce monster manuals, like the monster alphabet here. You can produce variant rules that take your game to other levels, like Stars Without Number, where you're taking D&D old school and turning it into a space game, right? You can make really weird settings with like toolbox mechanics like Unsuden. These are all very successful products here. You can make adventures, mega dungeons like Castle Gargantua, right? So these are just a few examples. There are more in my other video about what is the OSR. In fact, for you to be a successful designer today in the OSR, you have to do stuff that kind of pushes the limits in some way or another. It could be pushing the limits of weirdness, like Yunsuin does. Changing the way that you design a dungeon, like Castle Gargantua did. It could be just having like really clever mechanics for doing sandbox style play, like Stars Without Numbers and the other games done by Cinenomina Publishing have done. It can be that you just get really creative with monsters or items or something like that. Or it can be that you pick a particular niche of setting or what have you, that you adapt to a system, and that it's something that hasn't been done before. Right, and for me, like Lion and Dragon was the ultimate version of that, because everybody thought they'd already played medieval role playing. They thought, well, that's what D&D is, right? It's like medieval fantasy role playing, right? And I'm like, no, this is what medieval fantasy role playing would look like, right? So it's an alternate version of D&D where there was actual concern about being medieval in it, and not just being like medieval happy fun time, Renaissance fair. So that's one example. Arrows of Indra is another, right? Where you take a setting and you make the system fit the setting. Those are all different ways that you can do it, but you have to be very creative to stand out in the OSR nowadays. You can make, a classic module, a classic adventure, and it can still get some traction in the OSR today if it's good enough, if it's really an interesting module. But it's got to be something that pushes, even there, it's got to push the boundaries of excellence of what a module would be. In fact, the more mainstream that your module, that your adventure, or that your setting is, the more incredible it has to be in terms of how well you've designed it or presented it. Whereas if you want to be experimental, that's stuff that can stand out a lot. But remember, with the OSR, you're always painting within a set of lines, right? You've got this box that is the core rules of D&D, compatibility. And you have to stay within those lines. You can't paint outside the lines. So it forces you to be creative in a totally different way than this kind of art, the modern art sort of style where you can just do whatever you like and nothing matters, right? Here, everything matters. You have to make it within the box, within the lines. And so you have to design it really well. The key in the OSR also is that you have to get really involved with the OSR online community, you could call it, right? With the hobby networks of the OSR, right? Join the groups on Facebook, join the groups on Mewe, join the OSR Twitter. Let people know your product exists, because you don't have that same immediate locality, like the one-stop shop, which is the DM's Guild. You have TTRPG, but TTRPG has all kinds of different products in it. Whereas, somebody who only wants 5th edition stuff clicks on that DM's Guild thing and he's there. It's all DM's Guild all the time, right? It's all 5e and nothing else. Whereas with the OSR, for people to find you, they have to know you exist. So it requires that you be a bit more of a marketer than just kind of this, drone that makes product and then puts it up on this site where Wizards and Drive-Thru are going to take 40% of your profits, right? So those are basically your options. You have to decide from there how you would go about making it, right? How are you going to be, what kind of a game are you going to design and why? And if you ever need help with that and you're willing to pay for it, let me know, because I am available as a consultant. Assuming I'm not busy at the time. So that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it. Please subscribe to the channel and put this video out anywhere you want so that people will see it. And that's one of the biggest ways you can help me. Besides that, if you want to help me, I do have a Patreon button. In every single video I tell people, but don't support me on Patreon. And yet every month I have a couple of extra bucks. I love you guys. You're just so funny. There's always some people that decide to put money into Patreon directly. But so if you want to do that, go right ahead. Put money into my Patreon. But if you want to get something back, I'd say, and you want to support me and my work, my videos, my writing, and everything else, then pick up my products. Pick up my books like Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion, or pick up my PDF weekly zine, which is RPG Pundit Presents. The latest issue, the one that came out just before, there should be another one out now, but the one before that is, as of the time I'm filming this, is it's called oh darn, now I've forgotten. Well, we just did, the week before we did number 90, which was Fuck Station Aleph, which is a crazy gonzo science fantasy space station. Oh, and right, and this one today, the new one, or rather this week, is Medieval Authentic Secret Societies, and it has 5 different secret societies that you can put into your fantasy game that are based on real medieval movements and social groups and activities. They're not exactly like, I'm not going to say these secret societies really existed, but they're secret societies that would perfectly have been able to exist in the medieval world, right? And that they were within, that each of them are within a different area of like things that really happened, like craft guilds, peasant courts, the carnival, feasting fraternities, and things like that. So be sure to check those out. If you don't like the sound of either of those two, there's 90 other issues to buy, and they're all from like 99 cents to $3.99. And you can pick one up. It's like giving me a tip. You're getting something in return. You're getting a product that you can use in your gaming. And it's a very good example of a model that has worked really well for me, at least, in OSR design. I'm making a product a week. Takes a lot of work, but that product ends up being something that has been reliably producing, generating income for me, and letting me really test my creativity as I I have to put out a product a week, right? And it's going pretty well. So that's it for today. I hope you liked the video. Currently smoking Lorenzetti egg plus Blue Boar.